So, welcome back to our tutorial series on Stellaris, where today we will learn about the magnificence that is offensive warfare. Offensive warfare is something that we're going to be discussing in relative depth. It is a relatively complex subject within the confines of the game, but it still needs to be addressed. I will be doing a separate video about how to deal with defensive warfare, as well as structures that need to be erected around your particular setup, at least when it comes to your space. First of all, what is really important when it comes to warfare is the type of FTL available to you. Now, obviously, there is three types of FTL: warp, hyperdrive, and of course wormhole drive. Now, of these three, they cause serious problems. Let's say that you have a game where you're playing with every single type of FTL available within at least to every single species. This causes serious problems because due to the lack of symmetry within warfare kind of makes defensive perimeters completely useless when it comes to military stations. There's only a couple of very specific situations where military stations are useful, especially when it comes to defensive wars. But we'll have several different discussions about that, of course. Of course, when later on in the game, when you get access to jump drive and side jump drive, this is no longer really a problem. However, before you go in, one thing that we do need to address, when it comes to hyperdrive, it becomes really important. Let me just give myself a bit of an advantage here. Yeah, there we go. So, as you can see, the hyperlanes in general are incredibly important within the context of offensive warfare. You kind of want to find yourself a position where you're thinking by yourself, you know what, this is a decent foothold within enemy territory. So in this particular case, the commonality of Alvis is a interesting target to us. They are incredibly, annoying to us. They are egalitarian and they are phonetic xenophobes, which means that we do not like them because we are, of course, egalitarian, but we're xenophiles, which means that we have opposing ethics. So, with hyperdrive, in this particular case, there's only one major road through their territory. Now we can take a look at what they have access to. Now, as you can see, this Star Accord, who have managed to capture this system, they've closed their borders to, which means they can only go through this system. That makes this particular system right here extremely important. Now, I want to say again that this only applies to hyperlane games. So if we go in towards the system and we find out that we need to find the arrow towards Panok, I think, where is it? Or is this Panok itself? This is Panok itself, of course. It is, what is this star called? Okay, so it's this one. So it means that whenever anybody is coming in through hyperdrive and any enemy ships, they will always be entering the system from this angle. This makes this particular area extremely important as a foothold within your own territory and as well as a staging ground from your own territory. So this, once again, this only applies to hyperlane games. When it comes to warp, the enemy can basically go wherever the hell they want, as well as with wormhole drive. But then, of course, they'll need to continuously build wormhole stations between systems in order to move further towards your territory. So, it is the start of the game. And, well, you've played for, say, 43 years. And you're thinking by yourself, you know what? It is time for war. First of all, let's take a look at what we have available to ourselves in terms of fleet. We've got destroyers and we have got corvettes. Here's the question. Is this a practical situation when it comes to going to war? It is not, and I'll tell you why. If we look at our own systems, specifically our own planets, you will notice that we are currently building a bunch of spaceports around our worlds. Now, we are about 450 years into the game, which means that we have got access to some pretty decent spaceports. Now, war is all about conquering as many planets as you possibly can. There are potentially some updates about that in the future. However, as long as planetary objectives are the key in the game, the main thing that you will need to be able to overcome is the spaceport. Now, the problem with the spaceport is up until potentially cruisers or late destroyers, or if you have a particularly large fleet, they are going to be incredibly difficult to crack. Why? Because they have a very large amount of firepower and will destroy your fleets. This also becomes important in defensive wars because earlier on you want to get as many stations around your core systems as you possibly can, because it means that the enemy cannot invade them because they do not have enough firepower to take it. This does not mean that you cannot go to war and say try to break some attrition, go after their military stations, for instance. These are, of course, important. Being able to cripple the enemy's economy and therefore their ability to fight is obviously kind of important. However, one thing that is important to note, if you're out there with your ships and you are minusing in your economy as well as your energy and minerals, that is, the power of your ships will go down. They will feel support problems, which means that they will go down in their ability to shoot giant objects towards the enemy. Or, of course, if you are laser orientated, etc. So, yeah, that becomes a problem. So you want to go to war. All right, well, the problem right now, like I mentioned, we literally cannot do it because we do not have any sort of fleet that can crack the enemy, support structures, as in their stations. So we're going to go and quickly move the clock forward a little bit and basically say, you know what? We want to see what is necessary to go to war. So, it's been a few years. You have built up your fleet. You got yourself a bunch of destroyers as well as corvettes. Now is the question, is it time to go to war? There's a couple of questions that we need to answer first before we go and do this. As you can see, the fleet right now, the third fleet in this particular case, has a fleet power of 2,313. The first question is, in our ship designer, through our destroyers, is there anything that we can improve from our fleet's design? So feel free to hit that auto upgrade button. And yes, it looks like that we can add afterburners to this particular fleet design. And afterburners in this particular case gives you additional combat speed, which means that you can move quicker along the battlefield. So before you go to war, always check whether or not your fleets are ready to go and if you can upgrade them in any way, shape, or form. Of course, you also want to do this with your corvettes. Let's upgrade this. There is nothing we can change. And basically go with that. When it comes to weapon designs, let's go have a look at these guys. Sadly, we do not have anything in the game that even closely resembles any sort of Office of Naval Intelligence. Therefore, we do not know what kind of weapons these enemies have. Right now, we are rocking mostly plasmas, at least in this particular case, which ignores 60% of armor, but has 20% less shield damage. This means that we will basically ignore a big chunk of their armor, whilst at the same time do less damage to their shields. I personally think this is a relatively decent payoff, and should work in general. Overall, this fleet itself should be quite capable of doing so. So, let's take a look at our potential targets. What can we actually do here? Do we have any information about them? Well, our information right now is that they have, in fact, closed their borders. Actually, it would appear that they have not closed their borders to us. And this is a good thing, because it means that we can send, for instance, a singular ship. Oh, no, they have closed their borders. Yep, they have closed their borders, so sadly, we cannot go into their space, which means that we will basically need to run this entire operation by ear. So, next up, we find out whether or not we have a decent admiral. So, we can go to recruit, see if we can get a decent admiral. Now, a good option, for instance, is aggressive, which increases the fire rate of the total fleet. Unyielding, which increases the ship hull points. Now, the hull points is the calculation of, what actually damages the ship. So, the ship in this particular case has a bunch of shields, a bunch of armor, and hull. If hull dies, it's the end of the ship. It gets destroyed. That's pretty standard there. There's nothing we can do about it. So if hull dies, we need to get the hell out of there. So the reason why I go for plasmas in this particular case is because we can bypass a whole bunch of armor and whilst doing slightly less damage to shields than usual, basically to directly attack the enemy's hull. Essentially, we're trying to burn holes through them quicker than usual. Of course, we have a whole bunch of different types of weapons available as well. We'll do a separate video about that sometime in the near future. Now, let's take a look at these guys. What do they have available? Well, first of all, they've got the kinky wall in the background, as they are slaving despots. I'm not entirely sure what these apparatuses are for, but let's take a look at what they can do. Well, they don't like us because of border friction. They are xenophobics, they are our rival, and some other modifiers. Basically, what this means is if they had the opportunity to do so, they would attack us as fast as humanly possible. Although humanly, in this particular case, is a little bit underrated because clearly they are disgusting space elves. In the meantime, it's also a good idea to start queuing up some armies because you're going to need those later on in the campaign. Let's take an additional look. Let's take a look at their relative power. Their fleet power is equivalent to us. Their naval capacity is also equivalent, and their technology is also equivalent. However, they are listed as inferior. Now, these equivalent-esque modifiers don't actually mean anything. They are basically saying, hey, it's equivalent. However, this can scale in either direction. It can be twice as strong of us as well as about half as strong of us. It's not really a good indicator of what things are. They are also hostile to us, which means that they will attack us at the first possible moment. So, let's declare war, shall we? Welcome to the war system. Basically, what happens here is we can try to conquer enemy worlds and basically stop them as they are. Now, right now, our options are to humiliate this enemy species, which would be good. You know, humiliation, we will get a bunch of influence for that. We get 100% influence. Their happiness goes down by 10% for 10 years. It's kind of nice. Stop atrocities, we get a plus 100 influence out of that. And if I quickly take a look at this species, it doesn't actually show what their... it doesn't look like... Okay, so they are not actually actively slaving, which means that they will not get any unhappiness bonuses from stopping atrocities. We can tell them to seed their planets, which means that we can take direct control of their worlds early on. We can also try to liberate their worlds. Now, liberation only is applicable if you don't want to be stuck, basically. What liberation does is the Empire will be forced to release that planet that you've liberated, and that planet and its population will swap to your ethics. They will become, in this particular case, egalitarian and xenophiles. What that means is that you'll have a lot easier time to vassalize them. And there's a couple of strategies built around this where you slowly but steadily attack an empire, liberate their worlds, vassalize them, etc., etc. So this is basically something you want to keep in mind when you want to go for a more quote-unquote xenophile approach. Let's declare war. So, then we got vassalize, which basically makes them our vassal, and they make tributary, which means that they are mostly independent, but they pay 25% of the monetary and monthly energy credits and minerals to us. And there's, of course, a couple of modifiers under, I believe, domination for that, where tributaries gives you an additional amount of income. It goes up by 10%. So, let's declare war. What shall we do? Well, of course, we're going to tell them to vassalize their worlds. So, first of all, we're going to need to take a look at where their worlds actually are, and most importantly, if we can actually get to them. We cannot get to this world. Our warp drive is not strong enough. So we can only try to capture these worlds. Thankfully, one of these worlds is their capital. We can see it by having these little triangles around them. So we're going to try to capture that. And there's Sim and this one. Now, as you can see, it costs war score. You can only have a maximum of 100 war score. Every single planet has a certain war score value, and you can only, of course, conquer the amount of planets up to 100, at least in adjective war score. There's a bunch of technologies that brings these down based per planet, so at very late in the game, you can very easily grab as many planets as you want. And I believe Fallen Empires or Awakened Empires have a modifier where it's relatively cheap to take their worlds as well. In addition, we can try to invite some attackers. Anybody nearby that wants something? Let's try to, get these guys to join the Void. So what will we need in order to, try to invite these guys to the war? Well, we can try to give them a planet. It doesn't look like they're particularly interesting, so we can put them back on towards the pile. What this means is that they may be willing to join if you can share the exploits. So what we can do here is, for instance, we can just hit done, and then we go back to its screen and basically say, hey, you get to get this world. They are not interested, fair enough. So we just put it back. We want to humiliate them. They're not interesting. Stop atrocities. They're not interested in that at all. So let's say if we give them the capital planet, which is this one, they're still not interested. So let's see if we can do one more. And they're still not interested. Overall, it doesn't look like there is nobody that's particularly interested in joining this war. I'm not entirely sure why the Void, that is all, which is this hive mind over here, would potentially be interested in joining this war. But yeah, that's one of the things that you can do. You can pull anybody around you into this war. We'll be fighting one opponent, which is the commonality of Alvis. So let's confirm this. And, of course, the AI instantly informs us that we have, in fact, declared war. Let's start moving our fleet into that territory. We're currently moving on fast, which is potentially a little bit too quick for this. Let's take a look at our technology here. +5. Ooh, hypercom forms. Always nice. So, okay. So the fleet is moving out, and they have jumps. They'll be arriving shortly. And there they are. So let's take a look in the system. Is there any potential targets here that we can destroy? Nothing. We have found out, however, that this empire is using wormhole generators. Wormhole generators allow for relatively deep jumping in long-range jumping, except it requires a quote-unquote spool-up time, which can be difficult to work with. So here's our first stage. What do we do? What do we go do around their territory? Do we go straight for the kill? Or do we roam around the enemy territory, trying to find their infrastructure and try to destroy it as fast as possible? Well, right now, we still haven't found any sort of infrastructure, which is kind of crazy. However, we do have a vision on towards this system. What we know is there is a wormhole generator here. That wormhole generator, in this particular case, is going to be an important target. So we're going to go and try to take that out. It also appears that this planet does not have any stations around it, which is pretty much suicide. Also, now that we've gotten into sensor range of the capital world, we can now see their fleet. So we actually can see what their fleet consists of and what kind of weapons they have. It looks like we lucked out quite a lot. They have a combination of nanocomposite armor and some shields, but mostly armor. And it looks like they are mostly weapons, missiles based, which is great for us because these things are terrible, which is great. They also use torpedoes, which could be a bit difficult for us to counter, but I'm sure we will be fine. Another problem that we have is that this fleet is currently sitting around a station that we cannot directly attack due to the size of our fleet. So we're going to need to do something about this. Whilst we are attacking this thing, we're going to go and take a look at our naval capacity and how that is actually being taken care of. Now, naval capacity is generated through the sizes of our spaceport as well as the amount of traditions that we have. So I believe in supremacy. Is it supremacy? I'm not entirely sure here. It could be some of the other ones, domination maybe. Anyway, there's one of the policies that increases the ability of your fleet. Also, for instance, we can have a leader, which increases the size of our fleet. We can have a civic, for instance, that also increases the size of our fleet. There's a bunch of policies available that you can discover. Like I said, also increases the size of our fleet. Now, as you can see, we're currently over naval capacity. This means that we will incur additional costs when it comes to taking our fleets in outer space. If we are in orbit around a planet that has a space station around it, they will find reduced costs in order to, they're basically in orbit, and they are reduced maintenance right there. Anyway, it doesn't look like we're having much luck in trying to bait the enemy out into space. They know our fleet is significantly larger than theirs, which means that we can just take our time and bomb this planet. So, welcome to bombing. Once we're on this particular menu, you'll find yourself that we have this button, which is the Orbital Bombing button. It has a great name. If you're Fanatic Purifier, you get a special one, which is called, I believe it's Apocalypse Bombardment. I'm not entirely sure. However, as you see, there is two types here. Now, if we go into our policies and we go into orbital bombardment, you'll notice that there is the option of going full orbital bombardment. It's only available to militarists or hive-minded, because hive minds don't care. Now, as you can see, there is this little green bar here, which is the Planetary Fortification modifier. The Planetary Modification modifier, as it is listed here, is basically the ability of the enemy's forces to withstand orbital attack. So, and we can also see that there is 6 armies there out of 12. Now, what this means is once we have managed to bomb their stuff out from orbit into submission, it means that our armies will do twice as much as damage. However, once we are bombing, it also means that the population on the planet becomes completely and utterly useless, which is great, for instance, if this planet is, for instance, say, a agricultural world, and all of a sudden the enemy empire has no food. This means that scouting becomes really, really important. Also, if we quickly go back towards the fleet, if we took a look at this, every month there's a 2% chance that there is a pop killed. There's also 5% chance that a building is ruined. Now, if you manage to kill a pop, you will get a modifier called terror bombing, which means that the other species won't like you all that much. So, let's select our army. We've been building for a little while. Let's get a leader on board there. Well, it looks like we do not have the room for a leader right now. However, getting a leader on board is generally a good idea. So, let's not do this right now. Let's go and kick a leader from somewhere. We don't need this governor. She can go get screwed. And we have 3 available. Army logistician is nice, as well as charismatic, which increases army morale. There's also a couple of other options. I think honorable and warlike is an option. So, yeah. So let's move this attack fleet into position and right-click on the planet and land our armies. Now, one thing that we do want to take a look at, and we currently cannot do it because the armies are currently not on a planet, is one of the most convoluted systems within the confines of the game. And I think we should be able to showcase this very shortly as soon as another army is ready on Zeng, which will be very, very soon, whilst we wait for our fleets to basically get into position around this world. We're still bombing. I don't think we've destroyed anything just yet, which is nice. But yeah, let's take a look here at Zeng. This army. Welcome to the most ridiculously unintuitive system within the game, and that is the Army Specialization box. If you click on the army, which doesn't really have an indicator that you can click on it, you'll notice that this little pop-up comes out. It gives you a couple of details about the army in particular. And every single division can have its own leader, which is kind of cool. However, you can also add a attachment. This is 3 menus in, by the way. I never use it. It's incredibly useless. Did the enemy just jump into system? They did indeed. So we'll do that. But yeah, if you click on this, we can get all sorts of really cool additional things. They cost minerals, but they do increase or decrease or increase a whole bunch of modifiers for your armies. Effectively, you can add things like Xeno Cavalry or Commissar Squads and stuff like that, making your army pretty damn good. So in this particular case, we're going to add Hunter-Killer Drone Swarms, which is pretty awesome, to say the least. And we're going to engage. Anyway, timing is perfect here because it looks like our fleet is now going to be engaged. Now we're going to slow down the game a little bit as we will find ourselves onto this menu. Now, as you can see, this fleet is mostly running with missiles. That means that they will outrange us quite significantly. As you can see, their missiles have a range of 90, whereas our plasmas are very much in your face with a range of 40. In addition, they have a single cruiser with large missiles. Those large missiles will most likely not affect our ships at all. They did manage to hit one thing, and the shield is down on this single destroyer. But as you can see, all these missiles are basically just floating around, and they will target most likely a singular object. So here we go. Yep, the first one is down, and the second one as well. So, we've already lost a couple of ships. It doesn't matter. We're still at a massive advantage. Now, as you can see, our plasma is kind of ramming into their shields. So, let's pause the game. We're on the fleet combat screen. The top bar is the likelihood of us winning the game. So, we are currently the big blue line. They are the red line. Apparently, we are defenders in this particular setup, and it's all calculated by hull points. If you have more hull points, you will be more likely to win. Our general is not as good. They have a fire rate bonus, which is kind of annoying, but we are basically in their face right now, which means that we can start chewing away at their hull points. There we go. It looks like we're doing just fine, and this is basically This is a big problem within Stellaris. And that is that, well, let's put it this way. Most wars are fought in a singular battle, a singular grand battle, that basically knocks out either fleet. From that moment onwards, you can basically steamroll the enemy without much problems. Which is a problem, of course, when it comes to balancing the game. Basically, it makes it less fun. There's not that much raiding going on. I've talked. The devs have mentioned that they could hypothetically change Doom stacks and basically do a whole bunch of raiding. But apparently, according to them, the game would be not nearly as fun. So keep that in mind. Anyway, we've managed to win this fight. As you can see, a combat stats menu has opened up. We can see exactly what we have destroyed, as well as what we have lost. Now, we've destroyed the entire enemy fleet, which is their cruiser, their destroyers, and most of their corvettes, as well as we've lost 5 corvettes and 5 destroyers and 7 corvettes. Overall, we were exceptionally strong, and we've killed their trickster general. Now, as we look down in here, we see how much explosive damage there was done, and this explosive damage is generally allocated towards missiles. That did almost nothing, and I have addressed this in a video in the past regarding missiles, is that they are terrible because they do not retarget. These missiles should do a lot better. In fact, basically, they should be able to knock out my fleet basically down a lot faster, especially because they have the range advantage. Don't go for missiles. Go for kinetic or lasers, kinetic or energy weapons. They are far better at doing any sort of warfare. Anyway, with that out of the way, we noticed that some of the fortifications have managed to pop back up. So let's send the fleet back for bombing and see whether or not we can attack the enemy. Now, this is a system that is most likely going to get stripped out of the game. Dropships are not particularly interesting from a gameplay point of view. And it looks like, at least the devs have been talking about, removing dropships altogether and integrating them within fleets themselves, basically streamlining the process a little bit, so we also don't have to go down through all these ridiculous menus. Anyway, we've selected our transport fleet. Let's click on the planet, and let's land our armies. Immediately clicking the fleet, and click on the army menu. Now, as our ships are coming in, there are the drop pods. They will be dropping in, and we are dropping several types of armies. We're dropping 3 Titanic Beasts and a Expeditionary Force. Now, as you can see, there's 3 levels of combat. They don't actually do anything. This is probably a system they wanted to use at some point in the game, but actually did not do anything with. However, our troops are on the ground, and there is a little arrow on them. That means they can currently not retreat. Also, there's one with a star, which means that a admiral is currently leading this particular thing. We cannot add any attachments because we're on a planet that we do not own. So let's pause the game for a second. So our armies have managed to push back the enemy in such a way that they are completely broken. The morale is low, they do not have a general to support them, and they will be doing significantly less damage. And they will start to crumble completely. And 3, 2, 1. And we've managed to control the planet. Effectively, this is pretty much the idea behind the warfare within Stellaris. It's very easy. So, at this moment in time, we could potentially negotiate a surrender of the enemy. We can take 2 planets off of them by clicking on here and then go to negotiate. They're not particularly keen on taking the of us taking the 3rd planet, but that is fine so far. We could potentially go through their systems and start raiding their planets, any of their infrastructure, for instance. Their entire fleet is completely sitting on its ass. Now, obviously, we cannot attack this this station without incurring incredibly heavy losses. So they have managed to build 1 cruiser. However, we're going to peace out of this war, and we're going to leave them crippled forever. And you know what? We're going to take their capital. Oh, we cannot take their capital. That is such a shame. So we'll just have to take their capital. No, actually, let's not do that, because it means that we will never be able to reach it, which would be a problem. So let's just take these 2 worlds and be done with it. So let's send our demands. And we have managed to win the war, which is incredibly useful. However, now that we have managed to win the war, it means that there is massive unrest on these planets. These guys do not like that they are currently being suppressed, mainly because they are decadent. So what should we do with this population? Well, we can set, of course, their rights. So these guys, let's set their rights. Let's give them no migration controls. Their living standards could be decent. We can even give them chemical bliss. We can give them residence, as well as caste systems, undesirables, which means they get purged pretty much instantly, as well as a bunch of other things. Now, this is not really applicable to our empire, considering we're egalitarians, but still, it's still something you can play around with. I hope this was a interesting little thing for you to learn about warfare within the confines of Stellaris. We fought our own little war, and we illustrated how basically stations are a serious problems within the context of early warfare. Hope you enjoyed this. If you liked this, feel free to give it a like and or a subscribe, of course. If you felt this was way too long and I was waffling for the entire way, the dislike button is there as well. Thank you so much for watching, and of course, until next time, take good care of yourselves and each other.